the angel who was expelled from heaven before Lucifer. The lost story. For centuries, we've been taught that Lucifer was the first to fall, the greatest rebel, the beginning of evil. But what if this story is incomplete? What if another angel, even older, had crossed that line long before, silently but definitively, a celestial being who didn't fall, but descended by choice? He wasn't seeking the throne, but something even more dangerous, to interfere in humanity's destiny. This story has been erased, distorted, forgotten, but today it will be revealed. And after you hear it, you might never see the spiritual world the same way again. Heaven before the rebellion, before any war, before the fall of any star, heaven was a song that never went out of tune. Imagine an orchestra where each note was a celestial being, in total harmony with the Creator's will. The angels didn't just sing, they lived worship. Everything pulsed with light and reverence, as if every heartbeat echoed God's name. But see, what if this once perfect melody was interrupted not by Lucifer, but by another being, one who dared to break the silence so subtly that no one noticed until it was too late? In the vastness of the celestial kingdom, there was something deeper than beauty. There was order. Angels didn't just do good, they were a living part of the very structure of good. But like any structure, even the most solid, a nearly invisible crack can begin to crumble it. And perhaps the first crack wasn't opened by vanity, but by curiosity, an unspoken question, a hidden desire. In Ezekiel 28:15 we read, "You were perfect in your ways from the day you were created, till iniquity was found in you." But what if that iniquity existed beforehand, hidden behind a celestial smile? It was as if heaven had a heart beating in peace until one beat sounded out of sync. An angel, unnamed in Scripture, would have disconnected from that rhythm in a nearly imperceptible way. Without fanfare, without lightning, just a shift in perspective. Once, an elder said, "Rebellion doesn't start with shouts. It begins with silence." And perhaps it was this silence, that of an angel contemplating humanity too deeply, that sowed the first seed of disorder, an idea that sprouted where it shouldn't. What if I interfered? This leads us to a practical reflection. How many times does evil start silently in our lives, not with a scandal, but with a small doubt and seemingly harmless desire? Have you ever felt that something within you wanted to stray off course, even if no one noticed, and yet it grew? Heaven teaches us that before great falls come small deviations. Proverbs 4:23 states, "Above all else, guard your heart, for everything you do flows from it." Sometimes, the true spiritual battle is against what is birthed within, not outside. Does evil always need a name to exist? Or does it start when we ignore the subtle signs of internal disorder, when we let almost nothing become everything wrong? Share in the comments, do you believe evil starts loudly or quietly? I want to know your perspective on this, because this reflection is the starting point for everything else we'll explore together. The angel who descended by choice. As heaven recovered from the first silent crack, something even stranger was happening. An angel, Azazel, made an unthinkable decision. He didn't want to ascend higher like Lucifer would later desire. He wanted to descend voluntarily by his own choice, and not just to descend, but to interfere. This sounded like thunder in the celestial corridors, even without any noise. Why would a being created to behold glory want to plunge into imperfection? Was it compassion disguised, or something darker, subtler, almost indecipherable? Azazel didn't fall as one stumbles. He leaned. Gradually, he looked upon humanity, still fragile, newly created, full of limitations, and decided that it needed him. He wasn't expelled, he asked to pass. And when the celestial gates opened, he crossed with a mixture of zeal and ambition. I can help, I can teach. Perhaps he said this to his brothers before disappearing into the abyss between heaven and earth. But heaven doesn't operate on good intentions outside of God's plan. For my thoughts are not your thoughts. Isaiah 55:8. Azazel's attitude warns us about something very real in our lives. Not every good intention comes from a good place. Sometimes we want to interfere in others' lives, in God's plans, thinking we're doing the right thing, when in fact we're crossing spiritual boundaries. Have you ever caught yourself trying to save someone in the wrong way, going beyond what God commanded? Be careful, because the line between zeal and rebellion can be invisible to our eyes. In 2 Samuel 6, Uzzah touched the ark to prevent it from falling. Good intention, right? But he died on the spot. Not everything that seems right is. And here the question hits deep. Why did Azazel want to descend? What was on earth that he found more intriguing than the presence of God himself? Perhaps he fell in love with the freedom of human choice. Perhaps with fragility, emotion, art, fear, or maybe the power of influence. And this choice created a spiritual echo that would be felt for centuries. In that silent act, Azazel not only abandoned heaven, he opened a path that others would follow later. Woe to those who go down to Egypt for help. Isaiah 31:1. Descending by choice may seem beautiful until it's too late. Have you ever wanted to descend at some point in your life, to step down from the spiritual level you were for someone, for a desire, for pride disguised as love? If this has happened to you, share in the comments. No one will judge. This part of the story is powerful because it reminds us that not every fall is an expulsion. Sometimes it's a choice, and choices have consequences. The mission of the Watchers and their corruption. After Azazel's descent, other angels were sent with a noble mission to observe. They were called the Watchers, not because they controlled, but because they watched responsibly. The order was clear: take care, do not touch. As invisible sentinels, they walked among men, protecting, noting, listening, without interfering. But time, companionship, and mainly desire began to wear down that sacred boundary. What was meant to be a pure gaze turned into fascination. And fascination turned into transgression. Azazel was not alone. His charisma, influence, and audacity soon touched other celestial hearts. Look at them. They are beautiful, fragile, alive. They need us. Perhaps he said, and little by little, what was an army of vigilance transformed into an army of spiritual seduction. The book of Enoch tells that there were 200. They all knew what they were doing. They knew they were crossing a line of no return. Still, they crossed it. As it says in Genesis 6:2, the sons of God saw that the daughters of men were beautiful, and they took wives for themselves of all whom they chose. This part of the story always leaves me silent, because it shows how even the highest can fall, not out of hatred, but out of desire, not out of revolt, but involvement. What began with observation turned into attachment, and this teaches us so much. Sometimes we also start just looking. Then we get involved. And before we know it, we've done something we said we'd never do. If you feel you're at a point where there's still time to turn back, turn back. Hebrews 3:12 warns, "See to it, brothers, that none of you has a wicked heart of unbelief, turning away from the living God." And here I need to ask you sincerely, have you ever been in that place? seeing something you knew you should avoid, but still desired, thinking it was just curiosity and then couldn't escape. Write in the comments if this part resonated with you. The Watchers were corrupted not by evil, but by attraction. This is as real today as it was then. The gaze that doesn't stop at the limit, the admiration that becomes temptation. All this teaches us that spiritual wars are happening even before the fall. The problem never starts with the act. It starts with the gaze. The dark pact on Mount Hermon. At the top of Mount Hermon, where the heavens seemed to almost touch the earth, something completely unnatural occurred. The 200 Watchers, led by Azazel and Semjaza, sealed a pact. It wasn't just a rebellion alliance. It was a curse-laden oath. There, at that real geographical point, one of the gravest decisions in cosmic history was spiritually established. It wasn't just about descending. Now, it was about remaining fallen. The text of Enoch is clear. They knew they would be condemned. Still, they did it. The silence of heaven contrasted with the echo of that choice. The sacred profaned. Imagine the scene as an inverted courtroom, where angels willingly trade light for darkness. We swear together by all that is eternal that we will never turn back, said Semjaza, fearing to fall alone. Azazel, bolder, simply smiled. There was no going back. Mount Hermon, which would later be mentioned in the Psalms as a place of dew, Psalms 133:3, at that moment became a portal of corruption, an inverted altar where faithfulness gave way to disobedience, a dark version of everything heaven had created with purpose. Here's where many people don't realize a profound detail. They weren't deceived. They chose. And this is a lesson that needs to touch us too, because often we think we're sinning out of weakness, but in reality, it's a deliberate decision. Sin is a choice. The pact was sealed with full awareness, just like our yes and our no, because although they knew God, they did not glorify him as God. Romans 1:21. And the echoing question is, how many times have we also sealed our own pacts, knowing that we are relinquishing his presence? In practical life, this translates to decisions we know will cost us dearly, yet we still sign off on. Like when someone enters a relationship they know will pull them away from God, or assumes an dishonest practice at work thinking, I'll fix it later. But what if there is no later? Mount Hermon reminds us that the yes to sin is often said consciously. And it hurts to think about it, but it's necessary. Have you ever sealed an inner pact that you knew you shouldn't? Share with me in the comments if you're willing to open your heart. Azazel became the symbol of this forbidden audacity, the leader, the mentor, the face of calculated disobedience. He was not the one who slipped. He was the one who built the ladder and invited others to descend. And when we understand this, we realize there are people who not only err, but drag others down. And there are decisions that not only mark, but compromise the entire future. Mount Hermon was not just a place. It was a spiritual turning point in the history of humanity, the forbidden knowledge that changed the world. If there was once vigilance, now there was instruction. And it wasn't just any type of teaching. After the pact on Mount Hermon, Azazel became a dark master among men. He taught what heaven had concealed, forging swords, the art of war, sorcery, manipulation of herbs, enchantments, astrology, cosmetics. He gave humanity what they weren't ready to receive. Powerful knowledge, yes, but corrupted. Like giving fire to a child in the name of progress. The shine no longer came from above. It was a false light, a wisdom that distances rather than draws near. Entranced, humanity began to walk more hand in hand with these fallen angels than by the voice of God. Women, fascinated with the mysteries of beauty and power, began to seek not the favor of heaven, but the seduction of the earth. Men, now armed, exchanged divine dependence for strength and domination. It was as if Eden was being erased, not with fire, but with ideas. Isaiah 5:20 warns, "Woe to those who call evil good and good evil, who put darkness for light and light for darkness." The exchange had already taken place. Humanity chose to follow a new master. And here I want to speak to you who are listening to this script attentively. If this message is resonating with you in any way, leave a comment with a Bible verse that reflects this part of the story. Something like, "Wisdom without fear is a sword without a hilt. It cuts those who wield it." Create your phrase in your own way, inspired by this content, and share it. And if this story is opening your eyes and awakening something in your spirit, give this video a like as an act of discernment, as if to say, "I recognize that not all light comes from above." And if this channel has edified you, subscribe, not just as someone who follows content, but as someone who walks alongside a journey of revelation. Here, we take care of your soul with truth, reverence, and love. But perhaps what impresses most about all this is the price. Because Azazel not only shared power, he spread contamination, like black ink thrown into a glass of crystal-clear water. And this corruption didn't just stop with his generation. It spread like a cursed inheritance, like a spiritual code that transcends centuries. Today, we see the reflection of this in the idolatry of knowledge without principles, in the search for solutions without dependence, and in valuing the exterior over the interior. When the source of wisdom is wrong, the entire river flows in the wrong direction. The question that lingers is, are we really ready to handle everything we ask to know? Because knowledge can be a blessing or a curse. It depends on who teaches us and where the source comes from. Azazel became the symbol of one who taught what was not permitted, and humanity, drinking from that source, began to tread the path of self-sufficiency. If any of you lacks wisdom, let him ask of God. James 1:5. The difference lies there, asking heaven or accepting from darkness. Nephilim, the giants born of transgression. From the womb of disobedience emerged creatures that should never have existed. The Nephilim, giants in stature but even larger in corruption. They weren't just hybrids between angels and humans. They were spiritual aberrations. Their souls bore the mark of transgression. Their hunger was disproportionate to creation. They ate, destroyed, dominated, corrupted everything around them. Wherever they went, the earth became barren. Heaven wept for their existence. As it says in Genesis 6:4, there were giants on the earth in those days, and also afterward, when the sons of God came in to the daughters of men. They weren't just an accident, they were the direct fruit of a wrong choice. Azazel, now the mentor of this chaos, was seen by humans as a sort of guide, someone who brought gods to earth. The Nephilim were celebrated, feared, and even worshipped. But in heaven, the scene was different. What had been corrupted was not just human genetics, but the spiritual order of creation. A profound imbalance between heaven and earth had begun. The original plan was being violated. The Creator saw his work, once very good, being invaded by a cosmic virus. It was no longer just about disobedience. It was about distorting what it meant to be human. This part leads us to reflect, what are we generating with our wrong alliances? Because not everything that is born of us is a blessing. Sometimes we are cultivating relationships, habits, projects that arise from a toxic mix of self-will and ignored spiritual direction, and the result, deformed fruits. Jesus himself said, "Every tree that does not bear good fruit is cut down and thrown into the fire." Matthew 7:19. The Nephilim teach us that the mistakes of parents can become monsters in their children, and that what we generate outside of God's will always comes with a high price. The giants of the Bible were not merely a curious detail. They were the trigger for unprecedented judgment. Their wickedness grew so much that there was no longer space for repentance, nor a safe place on earth. The cry of the innocent reached heaven, and God did not remain silent. But have you ever stopped to think that sometimes the giant we face today is the result of a decision made long ago that seemed harmless, an addiction nurtured, a repeated behavior, a trauma ignored? The Nephilim teach that what we don't address grows, and one day dominates us. When heaven reacted with wrath, heaven is patient. But divine patience is not the absence of judgment. When the earth was dominated by violence, when the clamor of the righteous was drowned out by the roar of the Nephilim, something changed. God no longer merely observed. He decreed, enough. The time for tolerance had ended. And then the four great archangels were summoned: Michael, Raphael, Gabriel, and Uriel, each with a specific mission, a celestial, organized, powerful judgment, like a storm that formed in silence but carried the wrath of millennia. Enoch 10 recounts this moment with a tension that sends shivers down the spine. It was heaven reacting. Michael, the warrior; Raphael, the healer; Gabriel, the messenger; Uriel, the bearer of light, each with direct orders from the Most High. And the orders were clear: purify, bind, destroy what was impure. As in a divine courtroom, the angels went to the fallen and announced their sentences. Azazel, your hour has come. Perhaps Raphael said, with firm eyes and a hand already prepared for binding, divine justice is not theatrical, it is precise. And when it arrives, there's no excuse, no argument. It's the end of a line. The time of mercy ends where the time of justice begins. But why did God wait so long? Why didn't he intervene sooner? The answer lies in the nature of love. God's love is not hasty. He allows space for repentance. He warns, sends signs, raises men and women with discernment. Even in the face of chaos, he does not lose control. The Lord is slow to anger and great in power, and will not at all acquit the wicked. Nahum 1:3. God's wrath is not a burst, it is a just response. And when it comes to restore, not just to punish. This moment in the narrative touches something deep within us, because many of us have felt the weight of wrong decisions and the inevitable consequences they bring. Heaven, in silence, observes, but it also reacts. Have you ever felt God calling you back before it was too late? Have you felt the hand of divine correction trying to pull you from a wrong path? That is grace. Because when heaven moves, it's not just to destroy evil, it's to protect good. God's judgment is also his cry of love for those who still hear him. Eternal imprisonment, Azazel, in chains in darkness. The order was given. Raphael, the archangel, received directly from the throne of God the darkest mission, to capture Azazel. There were no more dialogues, no more warnings. It was the execution of an eternal sentence. Azazel, who once shone among the angels, was cast into the desert of Dudael, a dry, forgotten place where even echoes find no walls to return to. Scriptures say he was bound there, buried under sharp stones, and left in darkness until the day of final judgment. Enoch 10:4-6. It wasn't just a physical prison, it was spiritual, a silence so dense it screamed. The sound of Azazel's chains echoes even today in humanity's spiritual memory. He was sealed, but the impact of what he sowed continues. It's like a stone thrown into a lake. The ripples still spread even after the stone sinks. God, in his justice, not only punished Azazel, he showed us the fate of anyone who, knowing glory, chooses pride. It's strong to think about, an angel imprisoned in darkness, without contact, without light, without voice. A reminder that heaven is not a place of permanence for those who reject holiness. Many imagine that the worst punishment is visible suffering, but spiritually, perhaps the greatest judgment is the total absence of God's presence. Azazel is not just imprisoned, he is separated. This confronts us with a serious truth. Hell is not just fire, it's distance from God. And this distance is generated by our own choices. These will suffer the penalty of eternal destruction, banished from the presence of the Lord and from the glory of his power. 2 Thessalonians 1:9. Azazel's fall reveals what happens when someone turns away from the light, and it doesn't come back. Have you ever felt that something within you was becoming trapped? That a part of your heart had hardened due to poor choices? Sometimes, our desert of Dudael can be emotional. It can be spiritual. But the difference is that we still have time. Azazel had no more chances. We do. And that changes everything. God's love still reaches us. There's still time to break the internal chains, to reconcile with heaven. Don't wait for judgment to come before desiring his presence. The time for restoration is now. The silence of the times and the taboo of the name. For centuries, the name Azazel has not been freely mentioned. It became a whisper among rabbis, an enigma among scholars, and a taboo among those dealing with ancient rituals. In the book of Leviticus, it appears linked to the ritual of the scapegoat, the one that carried the sins of the people into the wilderness, a dark symbol of transfer, guilt, and separation. But why Azazel? What does this name carry that made it so dangerous it was practically banished from the canonical scriptures? Perhaps because it doesn't just represent a being, but an entire system of spiritual corruption. The silence surrounding this name is not forgetfulness, it is protection. To remember Azazel is to remember that not all evil comes disguised as violence. Some come from teachings, from alliances, from decisions that seemed harmless. In Leviticus 16, 2 goats were chosen, one for the Lord, the other for Azazel. One was sacrificed, the other was sent into the wilderness. 2 destinies, 2 spiritual realities. A profound symbolism of the choice we all face. To serve divine purpose, or to be cast away with sins far from the presence of God. Azazel represents what we want to forget, but must be remembered to avoid repetition. He is the reflection of the consequences of a rebellion that begins with desire and ends in eternal isolation. And in our lives, this is all too real. How many times do we try to bury the name of what hurt us, pretending it never happened, that we never erred in that way? But as long as the name remains unacknowledged and untreated, it lingers like a shadow within us. I confessed my sin to you, and my iniquity I did not hide. Psalms 32:5. Healing only begins when silence is broken. Interestingly, the more the name was erased from public memory, the stronger it became in spiritual memory. It became synonymous with that which should not be touched, mentioned, much less imitated. The Bible never wastes words, and if Azazel appears, even if rarely, it's because his significance goes beyond being a character. He warns us of the reality that not every enemy shouts. Some merely observe, wait, and act when no one is looking. Azazel is also a spiritual mirror. And the lingering question is, what within us still needs to be named, confessed, and brought into the wilderness? What if Lucifer merely repeated what Azazel began? What if everything we believe about Lucifer's rebellion is just the second act of a much older drama? What if the pride that consumed the light-bearer was ignited by a previous spark, by a seed planted by Azazel? This hypothesis changes everything. It alters the origin of spiritual warfare. It rewrites the script of heaven. Because in this scenario, Azazel would not just be a rebel, but the initiator, the first to stray silently, the first to desire what was not given to him, the first to teach outside divine direction. As in John 8:44, where Jesus says, "He was a murderer from the beginning and did not stand in the truth." Lucifer then would have followed a path already opened, a path of fascination with power, limitless freedom, the idea that glory can be achieved through one's own merit. "I will ascend to heaven, I will exalt my throne," Isaiah 14:13. But what if this ambition found inspiration in Azazel? It's not hard to imagine a scenario where Azazel's shine and his influence among younger angels left marks. Like a voice saying, "You don't always have to bow, you also have power." Small seeds of pride planted in innocent hearts. This point in the story makes us look at ourselves, because often when we fall, we're not being original. We're just repeating mistakes we've seen, heard, or silently admired. Pride, vanity, rebellion are spiritual inheritances when not watched over. The Bible shows us that evil propagates easily when it finds fertile ground. What Azazel began, Lucifer may have amplified, and what Lucifer amplified, we still reap. That's why Ephesians 4:27 warns, "Do not give the devil a foothold," because he doesn't need much, just a crack. Have you ever thought that certain behaviors in your life may not be new, but ancient spiritual echoes? Invisible influences that began long before you were born. This doesn't absolve you of responsibility. On the contrary, it calls us to break cycles, to discern the origins of our attitudes. We are not just the fruit of our choices, we are also heirs to spiritual stories. Knowing this empowers us. The power to say, "With me, this cycle ends." Azazel opened a path. Lucifer ran down it. But we can choose to stop. Celestial conspiracy, the link between Enoch, Genesis, and Revelation. When we read the book of Enoch, Genesis 6, and Revelation separately, each seems to tell an isolated story. But when you connect the pieces, you see a much deeper plot. Azazel appears at the beginning as an ancient figure prior to Lucifer's fall. But he is also present, subtly yet markedly, in the shadows that run through Revelation. As if the spirit of rebellion he inaugurated is still in motion, waiting for the end of times to complete what he started. In Genesis 6, we see the sons of God uniting with the daughters of men. In Enoch, this scene takes shape, gains a name and consequence, and in Revelation we see the final battle between heaven and the forces of darkness. And there are echoes of that ancient transgression, now multiplied in the form of beasts, dragons, and spiritual empires. There was war in heaven. Michael and his angels fought against the dragon. Revelation 12:7. What many do not realize is that this dragon is more than just a figure of evil. He is the final product of centuries of deviation, perhaps starting with an angel named Azazel. This invisible link between the texts invites us to read the Bible more deeply, to understand that the spiritual world is coherent and that God is always revealing his truth to those who hunger for discernment. Have you ever thought that the wars you face today might be tied to a much older scenario than you imagine? That the oppression we sometimes feel is not just personal, but part of a millennia-old conflict? When we understand this, we gain authority, because we begin to pray with awareness, watch with purpose, and resist with understanding. The celestial conspiracy involving Enoch, Genesis, and Revelation shows us that evil has strategies, has legacy, has structures, but also reveals that heaven has never been caught off guard. God has always had a plan, always had a time, always had a faithful remnant. Knowing this comforts us, strengthens us, prepares us, because if Azazel and his kind left marks, the blood of the Lamb left a greater mark, a mark that purifies, frees, and restores all that was corrupted. Revelation is not the end of hope. It is the end of the influence of all that Azazel once started. What else has been hidden, and why? If Azazel's story is so impactful, so deep, and with such serious implications, why does almost no one talk about it? Why have the books that mention it been considered apocryphal? What exactly was attempted to be hidden? The answer may sting, but it needs to be said. Perhaps silence was a form of protection, or perhaps it was a strategy of the enemy. Because the less we talk about the origin of evil, the easier it is to repeat it. Erasing the traces of Azazel was erasing the warning signs, leaving people vulnerable to repeat old mistakes without knowing their roots. Many truths were removed not because they were lies, but because they required spiritual maturity to be understood. Azazel's story is not for the faint of heart. It confronts us with the fact that the fall began in the midst of glory, that not everything that shines in the spiritual realm comes from God, that there are teachings, gifts, and experiences that seem heavenly, but originate in rebellion. In 1 Timothy 4:1, it is written, "But the Spirit expressly says that in later times some will depart from the faith, giving heed to deceiving spirits and doctrines of demons." The Bible has never been afraid of the truth, but men have been, and many have hidden, silenced, softened. Perhaps out of fear of causing confusion, perhaps because they didn't understand the weight of these stories. But what we must not forget is that everything God allows to be revealed, He also gives grace to discern. Omission is also a form of spiritual warfare, and in these last days it is increasingly clear that what has been hidden is coming to light, because we need to know what we are dealing with, and we need to know who we are in Christ to overcome. This final question is the most uncomfortable. What else haven't we been told? What is behind the spiritual scenes that we still can't see? Perhaps there are things heaven has yet to reveal, not because it wants to hide, but because it is waiting for prepared hearts. Azazel was just the beginning. What he initiated influenced generations. But what the Holy Spirit wants to reveal today can heal centuries of blindness. And perhaps now is the right time to look at all this with reverence, with awe, and with courage. Because the light of Christ can illuminate even the oldest corners of history. The story of Azazel is not just a lost narrative. It is a mirror, a reminder that even the heavens were wounded by choices, and that spiritual warfare began long before we were created. He was the first to stray from the path, to break with order, to teach what should not have been taught. His fall planted deep roots in the world we know, but above his influence is God's eternal purpose, which is never defeated. Because no matter how ancient the corruption is, redemption is even more ancient. And the cross, which came later, already bore the power to heal what began long ago. Perhaps you've noticed throughout this journey that some battles you face today are not random. They have history. But this also means there are deeper answers for you. God has not called you to live in darkness. He wants to give you understanding, discernment, revelation. So if this content has helped you see further, share it with someone who needs to know this too. And leave your comment here. I want to know what this story awakened in you. If this series has touched you, like this video as an act of spiritual discernment, and share it with someone who needs to open their eyes to the invisible world that surrounds us. And don't leave here without watching the next video that is appearing on the final screen. It continues this journey with an even more impactful revelation, and it could be exactly what you need to hear today. The truth hasn't stopped here.